Amazing. Welcome, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the engaging discussions at the forum so far. A pleasure to be with you here today. By way of a brief introduction, I'm Paninda Thind, currently working as the Finance Nature Lead with the Climate Champions team, supporting the UN high-level climate champions who have the mandate to mobilize non-state actors, businesses, financial institutions, cities, and regions globally to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and advocate for policy shifts. I'm joining you today from London, UK, and I'd like to invite our panelists to the virtual stage, Michelle Cantor, Namendra Anand, and Julie Siegel, and I'll shortly get them to introduce themselves before, after I provide a bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So the session that you're joining is on how social finance and impact investing can enable a sustainable and equitable future. We'll wait for Julie to rejoin, but we'll continue. We will center this discussion on climate finance. There are many estimates globally on the quantum that is needed for climate finance, all in the trillions, but it is not just about the quantity of finance, but also the quality, as we know, who that finance is directed to and how. We're almost halfway through the decisive decade for climate action at COP28, which is the annual climate conference that took place last year. It was also the year of the global stocktake, where countries assessed their progress against the goals of the Paris Agreement. And newsflash, we are not on track globally. And we do need to course correct to get us back on track to meet our climate goals. At the same time, there are pockets of progress and solutions on the table. This upcoming climate conference, COP29, will focus on the international negotiations on the new global climate finance goal. We all know the destination is an equitable, net zero, resilient, nature positive world by 2050. And to enable that, we need a just and inclusive transition. And we know that achieving that future is contingent on the actions that we take and accelerate today, including mobilizing skills, effective governance systems, radical collaboration that shifts the power dynamics that we have. And so with this fantastic group of panelists today, we hope to discuss how we can accelerate finance for climate adaptation and mitigation, and more broadly, align the financial system with our climate goals. Because not only does the climate crisis pose systemic risk to the financial system, but the financial system, as it's currently set up, exacerbates the climate crisis. So the session and our speakers seek to offer a deeper understanding of the products, services, bottlenecks, and opportunities in climate-centered investing, as well as highlight successes of the past year and what to expect in the next 5 years as we race to create the sustainable, equitable future for communities. This session is supported by the Definity Foundation. And with that, I will throw it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. If you can all briefly introduce and share your role, your organizational affiliation, and your entry point to this conversation today on climate and impact investing. Julie, great to have you back. Maybe we'll start with you and then Michelle and Namendra.
Thank you so much, Paninda, and everybody, and my sincerest apologies that I seem to have the benefit of technical difficulties today. But delighted to be here for the very important social finance future of good. So my name is Julie Siegel. I lead a climate finance policy program at Environmental Defence Canada. We're one of the leading Canadian nonprofits that work on policy issues on environment and climate across the country. My work came to this space. I previously managed a portfolio of impact investments at the McConnell Foundation, where I had the pleasure of having a really impact-focused mandate. So we were investing in, for example, Indigenous-owned clean energy on reserve, large green bond funds, really an impact-first mandate. But I came to realize, and the reason I shifted into this policy role is because even if we perfected our portfolio, which the McConnell Foundation is on track for 100% impact investments, even if one portfolio is perfected, the whole financial system remains off track from climate action and nature protection. We need new rules of the game to change the way that the financial system works so that it instead works in the best interests of people and the planet that we're living on. And that's how I shifted from, the spreadsheets of investments into the world of climate finance policy. And the work I do now focuses on reconsidering how finance is regulated to advance a financial system that's aligned with climate action.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Love that, from spreadsheets to policy. Michelle?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, Michelle Cantor, Executive Director of Carolyn Canada Coalition. We're a charity based in southwestern Ontario, Canada's southernmost ecoregion, one of the most diverse, biodiverse, populated, industrialized, and threatened ecoregions in North America. So I came to Carolyn Canada, or I came to, climate resilient landscapes when I graduated from wildlife biology, and worked in research. I came to Carolyn Canada in 2003, so for 20 years we've been working on this, but I've been involved in its approach for 40 years, when it set a goal for 30% habitat on the landscape. And in 2017, despite best efforts, we did gap analysis and realized we were actually still losing habitat. So for centuries, we've been on a trending loss of habitat, which affects climate resilience, obviously. And so we set out a call to action to use new tools and address develop new tools beyond the traditional colonial conservation tools that weren't solving the problem. We needed to look at new tools. So we brought on board some financial experts to develop a model for us, and we launched that and tried it out to see what would happen, and it drew international attention and the Climate Finance for the Future Climate Leader Award. So we knew we were on the right track, coming from a conservation sector. We looked at the bond market and we saw lots of greenwashing, and also a huge gap and compelling opportunity to lead a deep green solution. So that's how we came to this topic. Thanks.
Thank you. Namendra, go for it.
Yes, it's my round next.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Namendra Anand, leading an organization known as Metro Vancouver Zero Emissions Innovation Center. This is located in Vancouver in the province of BC. I'm leading as Director of Business Strategy and Impact Investing. We are part of the national network, which is known as Low Carbon Cities of Canada. It's seeded by the federal fund, and it's mandated to work towards urban climate action in the largest 7 cities of Canada. So we are working with all levels of government, including municipal, provincial, federal, and Indigenous nations, to bring everyone together and accelerate the climate action, understanding different issues when we talk about social impact of the climate challenge and different challenges that we see when we talk in terms of financing and funding and designing all the projects and solutions around this climate challenge. I came to this understanding with my previous roles, where I started as an engineer, as a project developer, worked through different net zero program designs on the impact investment portfolio for one of the private foundation. What I have seen so far is the social finance is kind of the right combination of everything that we would like to achieve during the net zero goal, because it's not only about reducing the GHG emission, it's not only reducing the temperature, but it's about how do we achieve that just and equitable society while we are going through this transition of clean energy, which is broadly led by the capital deployment when we talk about climate action. So I think the Social Finance Forum is the ideal platform where they are bringing together different leaders who can talk about different lens when it comes to clean energy transition and this low carbon economic development. Yeah, that's a brief intro for me.
That's great, and I think it's fantastic to have these variety of perspectives on the panel today, from working on the urban agenda to the broader policy piece and active solutions in the conservation space. So my next question is to you, Michelle and Namendra, kind of double clicking on what you've mentioned from a solutions perspective. Michelle, maybe starting with you. From your experience, what are some practical strategies and instruments that can be used to finance climate adaptation and mitigation projects while centering equity? You mentioned, looking at the bond market and the solutions that received global attention. So would love for you to share with us a bit more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll speak to three aspects. So we brought a fresh eye to the finance space. And also we understood a need to shift systems, both ecologically, economically, and ethically. We're a networking organization, so we've had 40 years experience in coordinating joint strategies for an ecoregion, very complex. We're also North America's longest running ecoregional network. So we brought our best practices for collective impact into the finance space. And so one of the first things we did was identify that we needed ethical space and two-eyed seeing. So really under the direction of a couple of my colleagues, Brandon Dockstader and Sam White-Eye, who's now our Indigenous Leadership Director, we really slowed down our work and opened up the space and discussion to really allow Indigenous leadership to lead the way in what we were co-creating. And that created a respectful cross-sector collaboration to combine the ethical, ecological, and economic goals. We realized we needed to get out of our own way and get out of our silos and listen. Because the echo chamber of our conservation silo was really depressing. It was essentially a litany of loss with very little solution. So by connecting with other sectors, we started connecting the green dots. We needed to create ethical space for strengthening relationships and developing a common language and accelerating respectful agreements for urgent shared goals. So for example, our co-creation sessions bring people to the land so that wealth holders, Indigenous leaders, and seed collectors all have an equitable space at the table. Secondly, we use a healthy landscapes approach, which is a win-win solution. And a key part of that is respecting that local stewards know what the land needs and know how it is going to be resilient and climate smart. So allowing the CIB to operate from a handshake agreement with Indigenous partners to supporting the vision of youth or social enterprise startups or regenerative farming with native plants. We reduce barriers by implementing powerful yet elegantly simple criteria and technology to reinforce equity. So we redesigned our whole systems and platforms. For example, we have Indigenous youth who have as much access to the CIB as international corporations, multinational corporations. Regarding the financial model, we chose an outcomes-based instrument to ground the work in real change on the land and support growing it for sustainability. So this allowed us to embed a collective impact approach to foster collaboration rather than competition. So this is what we learned after the fact. It was a really powerful choice to give it, and it also gave advantage to groups who did the right thing. So we were looking for a model that would have a competitive advantage over greenwashing, which we didn't see existed at this point. We also chose a model that supported important standards, local economy, and diverse community-based approaches while accelerating action. And that's where the outcomes-based model really fit with us well. It's financially very simple, but powerful in making that systems change that we were looking for. Thanks.
That's fantastic. And as you said, creating that space to allow for that collaboration to happen and taking a step back to allow for listening is crucial to advancing these solutions. Namendra, same question to you in terms of the practical strategies and instruments that you're working on as it relates to catalyzing finance for climate adaptation and mitigation at the urban level.
I would quote one example because we are leading multiple different projects when it comes to climate action. One program that we are working on, which is known as Retrofit Accelerator, we are trying to work with all the different build sectors whether it's commercial, it's rental, non-market housing, and Aboriginal housing. And we are listening to all the asset owners, all the property managers, what they think about climate action. And when they try to plan for the retrofit projects to mitigate their carbon footprint, what are the challenges that they are facing in terms of financing those solutions. We are listening all different kind of challenges depending on which sector they belong to. And to find solutions, we are talking with different municipal leaders, we are talking with different banks, what they are thinking on the financial side and on the policy leverage side. What we learned so far is different banks and different financial institutions, they are ready to move forward with the climate finance. The missing piece is understanding about the risk. When we talk about any retrofit project or any climate project in the build sector, so what we learned is the bigger financial institutions, they are still looking to come up with a framework where they can clearly articulate how to manage the risk. An organization like us, Zeek, who is a group of experts, and we network with multiple stakeholders, uh, we can identify different frameworks from different perspectives. So I think that's our idea through this program, bringing everyone together and finding a solution that will work for different stakeholders, from the policymakers, from the business practitioner, owner, and the financier as well. The key idea there is once we identify different stacking of funding in terms of supporting a climate action, then which player is ideally suited to go as a first stage of funding and willing to take the risk as a initial climate solution development side. This is a common narrative when we talk about innovation. So we are trying to innovate with different ideas and try to work with financial institutions and municipalities to understand where they would like to move forward, where they would like to collaborate. And if we find kind of mutual interest, we bring everyone together for a common brainstorming session, try to identify different solutions, and prepare a clear framework around the risk management as well as impact measurement side. Because once we move forward on the financial piece, it's still tricky to identify and quantify the impact that everyone would like to see, because it's a little bit subjective depending on who is looking at the impact and how they design the program. So these are all the questions we are trying to find answers to.
No, that's really helpful, and it's great that both of you touched on the process through which you are designing these instruments, and how important collaboration and bringing together different stakeholders to the table is as part of that, which requires obviously translating different types of knowledge and expertise, which is not an easy task, but something that needs to be done if we're to move forward collectively on this effort. I do want to pick up on the point around impact measurement, which we know is quite key in all of this, in climate investing and impact investing. And specifically, would love to hear your thoughts on what are some tools and metrics that are most effective in your experience when it comes to quantifying and understanding impact of climate finance projects, given it is outcome based, but at the same time, you're dealing with different types of stakeholders as well that would want different metrics to suit their needs. So how do you also balance those demands? So Michelle, maybe we'll start with you, and then Namendra.
Sure. Yeah, so we spend a lot of time developing an impact measurement evaluation framework from an investing perspective. But before we did that, we actually kind of jumped in right away with what we knew. So our first pilot, phase one, to get it going quickly, we used what we knew was very compelling and easy to measure, was a number of hectares improved. And we used our knowledge of the land to understand what improvement really constituted improvement in climate resilience and climate smart. So our phase 1 and 2 pilots, we used hectares of improved land as our pay for success metric. Most outcome payers understand this, and it relates directly to our goal of 30%. This is what research tells us, that you need 30% habitat on the landscape for healthy lands. That includes protecting your air, water, climate, soil, wildlife, and people. And 30% is minimum. And if you look at research worldwide, it's actually with climate shifts, probably closer to 50%. In our region, we're at 15%. So we're at less than half of what's needed for healthy landscapes. So by using hectares, we're actually targeting what we really need to do on the ground to improve resilience for all these benefits. So to define, and because we're ecologists, we knew how to define improved land, and we used definitions by reviewing recommendations of 100 plus recovery strategies. And these recommendations also support 14 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we summarize them by calling it Save, Steward, Seed, and Lead model for healthy landscapes, which is protection, stewardship, restoration, and leadership in shifting towards Indigenous leadership and regenerative economics. And then while we did those 1 and 2 models, we're also at the same time working with our diverse leadership team facilitated by the Ivy Business School. We developed a 2-eyed seeing evaluation framework for connecting habitat, connecting knowledge, connecting opportunities, connecting hearts and minds, and connecting bodies to the land. We identified 2 metrics per sector, both qualitative and quantitative, that provide the bigger story of the bond. So some outcome payers are more interested in some of these co-benefits than others. But that's kind of the beauty of this healthy landscape portfolio, is that it offers all these co-benefits. And so for an example, one of our metrics is, intergenerational events and connections. And so we brought that Indigenous knowledge as well as the settler knowledge to identify what metrics were most compelling, what we could measure easily, and what we could engage our partners in measuring on the landscape. We brought 40 years of experience in land-based monitoring to this process. We're also right now in a very interesting process of developing an audit trail with a major accounting firm, and really looking forward to launching that probably later this year. Thanks.
That's very exciting. Namendra?
Yeah, I can share my experience when it comes to impact measurement. Our program is heavily dependent on the GHG footprint. So ideally, what first metrics comes to our mind is, let's measure the GHG reduction. But when we design the system and when we design different understanding around the carbon emission reduction, we came to realize that our impact is not only direct GHG reduction, but it's all about the potential to scale out that initiative and potential to even reduce higher amount of GHG through that program design, through multiple projects which will be implemented. One example is in our retrofit accelerator program, we are providing concierge services to different asset owners. For example, we are supporting them to create a decarbonization plan, understanding their assets and understanding their long-term planning in terms of energy requirement, retrofit, and financing it. The ideal impact measurement in that case would be the true potential for GHG reduction when the full project will be implemented. So it's not only looking at near-term future, but looking at the total reduction of GHG. And we classify this as total cost of ownership. And we calculate all the quantification that we can do. When it comes to preserving the existing buildings versus new build, we are adding another matrix which is known as embodied carbon. Because when some buildings are built as a new build construction, then we already have 50% of embodied carbon logged into that building construction phase. That means when we are pursuing the retrofit project, upkeeping the building itself, then we are preserving that already design embodied carbon in that asset. So we are quantifying that as a full life cycle carbon emission through that asset. That's another aspect of it. When we are looking for granting and impact investing to different communities, different investing, there we need to think innovatively when it comes to impact measurement. One idea is when we are looking at youth led projects or indigenous community led projects, if we go through this scientific calculation about GHG reduction, it might be a lower amount that we can potentially reduce in terms of GHG reduction due to purely due to number of residents and number of occupants for one building. So in that case, we need to highlight other collateral benefit from the health perspective, from the comfort of the occupant and the community well-being, because those are the dominant parameters in that setting. So we assign different weightage to those benefits as compared to GHG reduction as one parameter. And then it becomes a mix of different priorities, and we assign different weightage depending on case to case. Um, so I think these are different ways that we are trying to achieve our impact measurement. But every time we need to be innovative, and every time we need to hear to the community members what they really would like to achieve through a program initiative rather than being prescriptive about the impact measurement.
That's great. And a quick follow-up on that, are there certain standards that you're expected from financial institutions' perspective to adhere to, or green bond principles, social bond principles, and so on? Are those helpful in providing some sort of a starting point? But yeah, curious to hear if that is an expectation. This is to both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can answer first. In our case, this is highly flexible. And as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of innovative way of designing different metrics. But because we are working with our national office at LC3 Network and FCM, we take their advice when we design the impact measurement metrics. But there is no set standard that we are following as an international standard in terms of financial sector, because we are still working with the intersection of climate outcome and financial regulation. When it comes to reporting all the financial data, we are following the guidelines. When it comes to the climate outcome and benefits of a program initiative, it's highly subjective to the community need and why the program is being designed.
Thank you. Michelle, anything to add to that?
Your question was, is there flexibility? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if there are any other kind of international or global standards that you're adhering to? You mentioned the SDGs, but if there's anything else that you adhere to as part of the impact measurement process.
Yeah, I mean, we come from the conservation sector, so we use a global open source standard for conservation impact measurement through the conservation action planning and kind of healthy country process. And then we align with the SDGs, and we're following, the development of metrics globally as well. And part of that is, right now we're looking at, through our research with a major accounting firm, also how do we measure and qualitatively and quantitatively the contribution to reconciliation. So that's what we're focusing on a lot now. We don't have the answers yet, but we are aligning with those global standards as well.
Fantastic. And it's great that both of you touched on, very impactful sectors, the built environment, which obviously is responsible for much of the greenhouse gas emissions, close to 30 and 40% globally, and, conservation, sustainable management, restoration, conservation of nature can contribute to 1/3 of the climate mitigation solution that we need to meet our 2030 climate goals. So very impactful sectors that you're both working on. And we'll move forward with Julie. Welcome back, given your advocacy work with Environment Defence Canada. Wondering if you can share what you see as the future direction on climate finance in Canada, and what are some trends that are shaping its evolution over the next few years? I'm sure you're thinking deeply about this every day, so I'd love your insight on this.
Warm thanks, Belinda, and apologies again for the technical difficulties on my end, but I'm so glad to be with you and speaking about this important conversation about what do we see as the future trends here. What I would start with is saying that on social finance and climate finance, we are really behind in Canada. And this is despite the great efforts of the people on this call. Likely everyone in the audience on this call has been working hard to invest in ways that are for the best interest of our planet and the people living on it. But still, Canada remains quite behind. For example, Canadian banks are some of the world's largest investors in fossil fuel, which is the leading cause of the climate crisis, and statistically underinvest in clean energy relative to global peers. So, capital is limited by default. The more that continues to flow into investments that harm the planet and our economy, the less there is available for solutions. So when we're talking about future direction, I think we really need to recognize and into green solutions. When it comes to thinking about mitigation and adaptation, again, it's that recognition that there is an opportunity cost. The more we invest in the problems, the less there is available for the solution. So we need to, in fact, switch that ratio. Whereas right now, Canadian financial institutions are investing about 4 times more into fossil fuels than to clean energy, which has evident climate implications, but also huge social implications. If you think about workers being affected by heat, or nearly half of Canadians being directly affected by a wildfire, in their homes and livelihoods being affected by that too. So in terms of the future directions, from a more positive way, I really hope that Canadian financial institutions kind of follow the logic that we've seen globally at United Nations conferences by other international policymakers, to recognize that we need to make a just climate transition and to start investing in that way. The second important piece of that comes back to the policy environment that either enables social finance and climate aligned finance or makes it harder. So what needs to happen is, new rules of the game, as I had mentioned, to make it easier to align investments that have a positive impact on the world instead of a negative one. For example, if you think about the fiduciary duty, the core obligations of financial institutions, what their, how their transition, if they have a credible climate transition plan that considers a just transition and how it affects people and communities, that's what we really need to see as the next trend. And I think the key piece would be to move really, whether it's, both when it's actions from the financial institutions or investors or companies, and when it's policymakers thinking about how those organizations should act. We need to move away from this idea of just reporting on what they're doing to instead improve what they are doing. For example, when it comes to climate, don't just talk about your pollution today. I don't need to know necessarily what you're polluting today unless you're accompanying that with a plan to reduce your climate emissions and build climate resilience in a just and equitable way. Again, really looking at moving beyond transparency to action plans and then delivery on that and accountability for delivering on that. In terms of trends, I think I've highlighted where we are and why we need to start moving quickly, and that's the direction that I sincerely hope we're on track for.
Thank you for that. Well put. Pledges and plans and turning commitments to actual action. well, across Canada and hopefully globally as well. Financial institutions, as you've said, play such a key role in advancing and enabling the shift that we need to see across the real economy. So it is a key enabler in advancing on the just climate transition that we need to see. Would love to hear everyone's thoughts on some of the primary bottlenecks or challenges that we see in climate-centered investing that investors need to be aware of, and how can we overcome these challenges? Michelle, we'll start with you, then Julie, then Namendra.
Thank you. I feel like there's a lot of bottlenecks, so I'll try to be quick. We intentionally designed this and got into this space because we had identified bottlenecks in the conservation sector over the years. So one is colonial preconceptions. So when we're talking about shifting systems from a colonial lens only, we're missing a lot. So we intentionally stepped back and listened to our Indigenous leadership pillar to really rethink what we needed. And that actually simplified a lot of what we were doing, because there's a lot of answers there already. We also, there's a bottleneck in identifying, well, what is a good industry? What is good work? And essentially growing native plants is the greenest work on earth. It literally grows life, and yet it is the least supported. So starting to get that message out. Another bottleneck we continually run into is top-down goals. Often our approaches are marginalized because they want top-down goals, or the standard practice is top-down goals, and we really want to listen to the stewards on the land who know what the land needs. And one example of this is the carbon number. Everybody's chasing the carbon number. From a landscape perspective, that is not the whole story, and that it leaves out of a lot of essential land work that has been suppressed by destructive industries. So we're creating through the CIB a technology and a number for healthy landscapes. The other big bottleneck is research before action. We're told over and again, do the research before you act. And we finally flipped that. Instead of waiting for a perfect model to be identified, because people just weren't in the space, we started with a handshake agreement with Indigenous investment and land trust partners to learn by doing, and it's really powerful. It allowed us to lead the way in Canada, listen to community, and develop a flexible, responsive, and resilient model for complex challenges that actually provided greater impact through the pandemic. So we knew it was a resilient model just by the way it was created and what we had to deal with. Also, a lot of people have heard about the valuation of ESGs. I hear this all the time. Well, what is the value? We have to know the value before we invest. Well, that's not true. The demand for sustainability is growing by leaps and bounds. People are falling over themselves to invest in it. They don't know how. They're looking for the science behind it. Well, we have the science behind it. We've been working on that science for 40 years. So we just leveraged that. We act on what we know now, that we have 1,500 native plants that need to be saved. They're the building blocks of healthy habitat. 30 to 50% of habitat is needed for healthy landscapes. And there's one place to start, where the opportunity is, not where the threat is. So we flipped the script from threats to opportunities. We discovered unmet demand on 35,000 hectares. So there's opportunity to scale. And we did an economy of hope report to show that you can leverage habitat for an ethical ecosystem economy and create green, healthy jobs. And finally, it's the education of outcome payers. That's a bottleneck for us that we weren't really expecting because we're not in the financial sector usually. So this is a new space that we have to actually educate the investors and outcome payers and accelerators. So we're really grateful for forums like this. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Julie, your thoughts on key bottlenecks and solutions to that? You're on mute.
Thank you so much. So in terms of bottlenecks, I mean, I loved everything that was just mentioned, especially in terms of when we think about overcoming those bottlenecks, prioritizing solutions that work for communities and workers and Indigenous communities across the country and that reflect different ways of knowing is so important. What I see as a key bottleneck is an irrational attachment to the status quo. In Canada, we seem to have a huge sunk cost bias when it comes to determining our climate action. That needs to change. We need to think about the economy that we want to build tomorrow, both in terms of our energy systems and in terms of how we want people to operate within that and to thrive within that. So we need to get rid of the sunk cost bias where we simply support, industries of yesteryear or anachronistic industries and instead look towards the future. Often when I speak with international colleagues, I often find people baffled that many of our, kind of large financial institutions, in the way that they see it, don't seem to yet understand that the climate transition is inevitable. So we need to shift that mindset. Whereas international colleagues will often say, the large banks, the large pension funds are moving towards a more socially, environmentally oriented economy. They find that, Canadian investors kind of still have their heads in the sand, heels in the ground of saying, how much can we keep of how the economy used to work instead of really thinking about what is needed next. Probably the biggest bottleneck you can imagine is when people aren't yet ready for change, almost a cultural inertia that needs to be overcome. In terms of a lot of the other barriers, people talk about, for clean technology, there are huge hurdles to get capital all the way through commercialization. For startups in different industries, the reporting barrier is so huge. Certainly those are relevant, and I respect the experience of people who have gone through those bottlenecks. But at the same time, those are micro individual pieces. And what really needs to change is, the mindset that the climate transition is inevitable and it's in the best interest, no matter how you analyze the question, to shift your investments out of polluting industries into clean solutions in a way that prioritizes a just transition.
Thanks for that. And as you said, the opportunity cost will continue to increase if we don't focus on investing in the solutions of today and tomorrow. Namendra, your thoughts on this topic?
I don't know how much time we have left in this panel, but I would say the biggest bottleneck is understanding around the impact investment. Because most of the time when I talk to banks and financial institutions, the preset notion is impact investment is about concessionary return in terms of financial return, which is not always the case. Because if I can improve the climate, the well-being, and the environmental benefit of any assets, any investment, it's actually a better opportunity than maintaining the status quo and doing the business as we are doing today. So it's kind of a system level change that we need in our mindset. When we talk about communities, when we talk about future opportunities, there is scientific evidence, as mentioned by Michelle. We all know about it, but now we are trying to convey the financial sector that if they can integrate these outcomes, these impacts as a priority alongside the financial return, then we can achieve this low carbon economy transition. Because there are multiple factors seeping in when we are talking about low carbon economy. For example, intergeneration wealth transfer. The new generation, they clearly understand what does it mean as a climate action, and they are really willing to take the actions. However, all the wealth is being owned by previous generation, and they understand the finances from their own time zone. So I think there's a disconnect which needs to be addressed.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end on. Obviously, we could continue this discussion for the next 15 minutes and an hour. But thank you so much to all of you for this fantastic and really rich discussion on climate investing and what we really need to do to enable a systems level change. And thank you all for all the fantastic work that you're doing to make this shift happen.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Beninda.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.